Welcome to the show today. My name is Douglas Gabriel, and I'm here with my good friend John Barnwell to discuss the topic of perception as revelation of the Spirit. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, hello, Douglas, and we've been efficiently at work providing pathways into the massive work of Rudolf Steiner when you're talking about in excess of 6,580 lectures and 50 published books and lectures. And so there's a plethora of guidance in there for the discerning soul. And what we've tried to do with this project is give people kind of a corridor into the annals of Rudolf Steiner.
So true, John. And I'm glad you started off with kind of a overview, because really these books that we're putting out in the series from the works of Rudolf Steiner are really a path of initiation, a path of self-initiation. So if you want to start reading these books, it doesn't matter where you start, just whatever your interest is. There's 30 some of them, and there's going to be 40 of them. And then we know that some people can't afford books. So we give you 2 videos which discuss a lot of the content of the book. But as Tylo, he says, you don't really discuss so much the content of the book as you just discuss the topic itself. And yes, today, as I'm thinking about what we're going to say about this today, I'm thinking, well, I have to say lots of things I didn't say in the book because, you know, things have happened even in the month that it's taken, to have the book edited, proofread, sent to the publisher and published. But now the book is out on Amazon, and we have 2 books which recently came out on Amazon. This one, Perceptions, Revelation of the Spirit, and another one called Etherization of the Blood. And yes, I know I stole the title from Steiner, but there's a subtitle and it says at the top, but somebody complained the other day, how come your name, Dr. Gabriel, is bigger than Rudolf Steiner's name at the top of your series? And that's a good point. Probably because my head's bigger, or, my ego is bigger or something. But we have really put in...
I made sure not to make that mistake myself. I made sure that mine is much smaller.
Well, I've been collecting these questions from people, teacher trainers in Waldorf education, for many years. And so I had created these articles that were answering these questions pretty much in the order that they were asked. So the most prevalent questions, what were they? Life after death. Is there such thing? Where did we come from? Are there really angels? All these things. What about apocalypse? Are we in a... So we have had so many books that were really quite apropos to our particular time. But now we're getting into the deepest of stuff. So if you've been following along with these videos, or you've been reading the books as we've been doing them at a nice pace for you, about a book a month or something like that, then what we're going to tell you in these 2 talks and in the next 2 talks about the etherization of the blood are the principal secret teachings of all religions and all spiritual paths. Now, that sounds to be quite broad, but let's just say that a long time ago, I finally, after, 40 years of study, realized that if I could figure out exactly what sense perception is, and sensation, but sense perception, if I knew that if I could figure out what sense perception was, I'd be able to directly contact the spiritual world in an awake condition, instead of in a trance or in a hypnotic state or in the subconscious or the collective unconscious or the deepest levels of unconsciousness. No, Steiner tells us we have to do this in an awake, completely awake condition. So really, what does it matter? What's the matter here? You have to cross in an awake condition from the material world into the spiritual world. Well, if you can do that through perception, then what is it that is happening in perception? So John can attest to this. For about 20 years, I kept saying, come on, John, I know you know where this quote is, where Rudolf Steiner says that all perception turns into 3 parts and it gets imprinted on the blood, and that's the whole secret to everything. And I forgot where the whole secret to everything is. So it took me 40 years or something like that to kind of keep studying until we're at the point now that in this book, if you really want the quickest path without any religious nomenclature, doctrine, dogma, or anything standing in your way of just clear thinking, perceiving the spiritual world, then it is to understand what is in this book. Now, of course, we're not going to tell you what's in the book. Oh, no, that's right. John's going to tell you what's in the book.
Well, it's funny because I tend to contextualize things according to what is going on in my world. And just the other day, we were watching this interview with, as of late, our favorite pianist, concert pianist, and Menachem Pressler. And he just passed away a few months ago at the age of 99. And everybody always said that he practiced more than anyone. And when you hear him talk about playing music, it brings back the whole idea of the kind of inspirations that a human being can receive if they can only get their sense perception out of the way. And that's basically it, And so consequently, you will find unusual examples of unspeaking children that are psychic. Well, because they don't speak, but they have a relationship to the realm in which speaking is arising. And so, like we do, but we're so busy with other things that we don't notice, see? And so, and these things happen to us every day. I mean, this morning I woke up and I had sitting on a dock of a bay going through my head. And I didn't sing it out loud, it just kept going through my head. And Barbara gets up and she goes into the kitchen and starts singing Sitting on a Dock of a Bay. So what is that?
Well, in our book, we say what it is. We actually explain not only the philosophical, but the psychological and the physiological and the spiritual aspects of what perception is, what percepts are. And we make, in anthroposophy, the first thing they're going to tell you is, oh, good, you ask about that. Go to Philosophy of Freedom and spend the rest of your life reading it. We had someone on our YouTube site say the other day, he's just a sincere guy who's really trying to study Steiner. He goes, I'm so sorry. I tried to study the Philosophy of Freedom, and I try and I try, and I know anthroposophists would be very disappointed in me, and I just can't get it. What is he talking about? Please, would you do something to help me understand why anthroposophists keep giving me this philosophical approach to something which seems as simple as intuition and thinking is love. And I'm going, dude, you got the point. That's it. That's the whole point of that. But we just synthesized, summarized, and condensed the entire Philosophy of Freedom in this book into literally a few pages. So you can read it in an order where you just go, oh, that's what he's saying, without all that philosophical stuff all around it. Now, for a philosopher, there are many people who are basically they didn't even know they were materialists. So if they want to understand perception, yes, they have to do it philosophically. So they're going to separate out things like, okay, there's the percept itself. Psychology says that's all there is. Psychology says you can't even have a concept in relationship to that percept because we don't even know if you exist. Psychologists don't know if a human being can know anything. And philosophers are sure that human beings can't know much because they believe in nominalism or realism. They either believe there's something real out there that we're perceiving, or it's just a nominalistic representation of something that we project onto it. Because as you have all heard, your perception determines whether you're in hell or heaven at any moment in your life, whether you're alive or in the world beyond. So perception, for instance, what we do in this book is we not only summarize the whole Philosophy of Freedom so you can understand it, But we also teach you about the ethers. And you may say, okay, why are you teaching us about the ethers? We know your book, Eternal Ethers, la-di-da. We know you say that a Waldorf teacher is teaching the etheric body of the child. Got that. But why are you bringing this into perception? Let me read one sentence from a little lecture called The Human Soul and the Human Body by Rudolf Steiner. It's the second lecture, Riddles of the Soul and Riddles of the Universe. And these are the real riddles because he tells you the secret to the universe in here. This is GA 66. One sentence. Here it is. Are you ready? Without the understanding of the etheric world, an understanding of sense perception and sensation is impossible. So if you don't understand the etheric world, you can't possibly understand sensation. Well, when we realize this, because most of anything we're talking about on these tapes, John and I have discussed for years. So as we're discussing this years ago, I'm saying, okay, oh, John, this is terrible. I'm supposed to teach Waldorf teachers, but they're teaching the etheric, and there ain't a one of them, and there's hardly an anthroposophist who can tell you what the etheric is. And they don't know what the four ethers are, or let alone the five ethers, let alone the seven ethers, let alone how that comes in your body, let alone what does that have to do with perception, or what philosophers would call knowing. And if there are these ethers, then are the ethers in what it is you're perceiving? So in perception, as you're looking out on a tree, are there any ether activity? Is there any ether activity? The etheric formative forces, is it happening there? Well, guess what? You can't perceive that tree unless you know how the ethers work in it. But if you do know how the ethers work in it, and you have a cosmology based upon Steiner's view of the ethers, which of course you can find in the book I just mentioned, our book, the Eternal Ethers, A Theory of Everything. Why is it a theory of everything? Because everything in the physical world is manifested through the ethers. So if you can turn off your concepts, which is your cosmology, it's the collection of all your memories, of all the judgments you ever made about anything you perceived. And there's names for this in psychology. Of course, I have a degree in psychology too. So when you look at psychology, they tell you nothing. But if you look at yourself, it'll tell you everything. So when you make, let's just use the eye. When you get an impression, a sense impression, or a percept from the outside world through the eye, what happens? You immediately impose upon it, before it even gets in you, that, oh, that's a tree, that's a Douglas fir I'm looking at right now. And right next to it is another type of evergreen. And next to that, and so I'm taking my concepts and projecting them onto them so I don't see the ethers coming from them. And remember, the ethers are only alive for a minute. So if you're going to get the life out of something you're perceiving, you need to have the human capacity to go beyond time and space. So here I'm looking at this Douglas fir. I'm going to take it backwards in time and watch it shrink before it made pine cones, and smaller, back down into the seed. And now I'm going to take it and I'm going to watch it go through its dicotyledon and its first expansions of it. And I'm going to watch there. I just watched it grow up. Okay. I just went through time and space. So I just, in my mind, defied time and space through my own perception. I created those images. They're mental images. Are they the same thing as a perception? No. Do humans know that in any branch of science? No. They don't know that a percept creates a mental image. And if you get your concepts out of the way, you might be able to actually see something. And that's the trouble with science. They're not phenomenologists. They don't look at it. And they don't use their 12 senses. They use 5 senses, the limited senses. And so now we're talking about this. So now here I am, and I'm thinking the moral imagination that every Douglas fir in the world knows how to grow into that form, turn into a seed miraculously, fall back to the earth and die and be reborn and grow into this thing that is worshiping the sun, and all it needs is air and water and the sun. Okay, my mind is blown. So as I'm looking at this Douglas fir, I'm looking at divinity over time. And I'm also looking, because I'm an anthroposophist, at all of the beings who donated the mineral and the plant realm to create that Douglas fir.
Yes, but why a Douglas fir?
Because I'm looking at a Douglas fir right out the window. I know.
Of course.
I'm thinking to myself, they just think I'm an egotist. No, I love this Douglas fir. It's the only one. It's right there.
So, okay. So, anyway, so I brought up Menachem Pressler, and really, I highly recommend hunting it down. Menachem, it looks like it's about Pressler, and he's this old guy, and he's talking about teaching piano, and see, if you look at genius, which is somebody that is able to access something that's beyond normal. Okay, so that's a fine example of what we're discussing here, because for whatever reason, their capacity for representation is in advance of their fellow humans, so to speak, in that they can meet their perception with a more profound, shall we say, vantage point. And but where does that come from? And it's very interesting, because you get the conversations like Goethe's conversations with Eckermann, where he's talking about geniuses, and he's talking about Beethoven, and he's talking about Napoleon and all of this. And he says, but it occurs most frequently amongst musicians. Although you do get artists, and he mentions Raphael, for example, and Michelangelo, of course. And but when you get down to it, and you take the threefold nature of playing a piano, for example, and so you have the conceptual basis of all the notes. So that's like manas. That's something that happens in the realm of thought. Can you take that and make it into a conversation? Can you address the level of feeling to the point to where you brought warmth into the music, or whatever mood of soul is being expressed? And then, of course, the will aspect is you're actually using your fingers and you're playing the piano.
We don't talk about what we're going to talk about on these things. And I wanted to talk about, but I didn't know how to break into it. But you just made the perfect introduction to what I'm about to say, which, when I found this a long time ago as a teacher, blew my mind, and I started to use it immediately. There's I think he was Italian, opera singer in a family of opera singers. And you know what they say, that the great musicians have a perfect ear. Well, he proved that isn't true. He proved what it is he took opera singers who were having problems, and they actually blow themselves out and can't work for very long. He would put them back on stage, because he would gate frequencies from Mozart and Caruso and Gregorian chants, and then he would open up the higher frequencies for them. But at the same time, he would then teach them to use their voice to replicate what they weren't hearing, because if they couldn't do it with their voice inside, it wouldn't happen outside. And so he saved many opera singers. And then he started using this on dyslexic children, on autistic children, on people who had depression. And he found that the ear is so sensitive. And as Rudolf Steiner says, it's the oldest organ we have, the most developed of all the organs. And so if you can take a child who in utero, who has Down syndrome or nonverbal autism, who he says they didn't get the proper link to their mother's voice and her thinking, because the background noise of her heart, people in the room, arguments going on, the confusion of life, the child withdrew and didn't develop their hearing and didn't learn how to shelter, protect, and gate the frequencies that are background noise. And so if you look at an autistic child, they can't stand, in many cases, I worked with quite a few, too much light, too much sound, too much confusion, too many thoughts to anybody in their environment who isn't a good person. Like if a bad person walks into a room, and I've seen this, people walk into this school I was working at, and I could tell they were bad people. Well, the children all reacted immediately. They didn't have to look at the person. So they're telepathic. So what is that? One could actually argue, because they can't speak, that it is an adjustment for the fact that they don't have the internal speech happening, because they can't hear properly, then they're overwhelmed by the sensations they do hear or see or feel. And so they retreat and they go inside. So he was able to help these children come out in this system. They'll call it pseudoscience, but it's very effective. The number one system for learning a language after age 12 with not having an accent is called the Tomatis method. And he also is taught this. I've gone to seminars on it and stuff, where you can get these devices and you can gate the frequencies for the children, and you can even align them with their mother's voice. And for some reason, the mother's voice is the voice because they were in utero. When you're in utero, you create these patterns that determine what is the full spectrum of your ability to hear. What's the full spectrum of your ability to see? What's the full spectrum of your ability to use your heart as a sense organ, which the heart math people demonstrate that even if you take random numbers, random pictures, the heart knows what is going to happen before the random generator puts it on the screen. Your heart is a sense organ. So what we're talking about here today probably is what people are most interested in, is can your sense perceptions become extrasensory perceptions through developing supersensible organs?
See, the challenge is that you have continually thrown in your face that you have 5 senses, but no, you don't. You have 12, and you have the counter image to all 12 of them. So there's like these 24 potential modalities of perception that are actually available, but we get caught up in whatever we get caught up in, and that serves as a filter, and that filters out anything that isn't pertaining to whatever we think is significant at that moment. Now, when you get like what Douglas is talking about, you're talking about somebody who can't use the filters properly, and so they can't orient themselves within space and time because of this, because they're getting all this extra data coming in. And so what are you supposed to do about that? Well, that takes focus. And going back again to Menachem Pressler and the piano, where you have the conceptual basis is your sheet music telling you which notes and what all the melodies are supposed to be, and all that, the intellectual content of the music piece. And you have certain musicians that they play like that, they sound like that. And that's focusing on manas, that's focusing on the thinking principle. But when you can take it like someone like Pressler and play it in a way that literally pulls at the heartstrings, literally his ability to make a piano whisper and then make it boom across a valley in just an instant, that there's a level of feeling happening in the music. And he talks about this other pianist he wanted to study with, and he had a tremendous regard for his playing, and he went but he heard him say something that about a composer where he like looked askance at Claude Debussy, and see, Pressler's really into Debussy, but he plays it so beautifully and and you get the individual he was talking with. They're more like an athlete almost. I mean, look at how fast I can look at how fast I can play this piece of music, and the technical features of the music in the realm of manas, whereas Pressler is always striving for the realm of buddhi. He wants to insert the level of feeling. And Rudolf Steiner is very clear. He says that when you're praying Om, for example, it will chase away all the demons, AUM. But it has to be done with the proper mood of soul. And that's the whole key. If you don't have that proper mood of soul, you're not really entering into the experience with the same potency. And that's that middle ground, the realm of the archangels. The thought aspect is the realm of the angels, and then your feeling aspect ties into the realm of the archangels, and then behind the actual physical activity is the realm of the archive.
We can just, I thought we might just do one show on this. And then when I thought about it, I said, we could probably do 10 shows on this. Okay, so they now know through research, demonstrated it repeatedly, that if old people who have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, it actually makes them feel better, and some of their ability to access their memory comes back, their shaking stops. And if they dance and you have Parkinson's, the shaking stops as you're dancing. And as we know, the word is the most sacred of all things. That's what created everything, was the word. And we know the word has been lost. And so what we're talking about here is Alfred Tomatis is what I'm talking about, is that Alfred Tomatis figured out ways to filter the background noise and open the gates to higher hearing. And it only comes when you can hear your own voice and replicate it inside of yourself. So this is what I was talking about before. Perception is not just a matter of looking at your mental images. It's a matter of projecting yourself in perception into the ethers of the thing that you're perceiving, and then bringing them back into your body, at which point Steiner says they die into your sense organs. They sacrifice themselves continuously. The Douglas tree is continuously sacrificing its living nature that it had to go through to give me the appearance of its reality. And so nominalists are wrong. There is a reality, and the reality is the spiritual world. Problem is, spirit shatters when it comes into matter. And we get to see a little bit of its life as it's dying and or as it's building new life. And then, of course, it dies. Whatever life there is dies and then is reborn. And so we have to watch these things as a full process. So the process of perception is a process of nutrition, according to Rudolf Steiner. If we are perceiving the world properly, it comes in as nutrition from higher spiritual beings, because in the moment that we get our concepts out of the way and our false judgments out of the way and our selfishness out of the way, and stop projecting that, let's say that was an apple tree, that I just want to eat the apples, or I just want to take advantage of what it is I'm perceiving, which is what most people do. They look towards the vices, not the virtues. And so what's happening here is you can commune with the spiritual world if you know how those things got there, because we are not bound by time, space, or consciousness as human beings. And this is the nature of these children who may be damaged, or people who are damaged in one way or the other enhance another sense organ. But in the future, all of us are going to be using our heart as a sense organ. And we'll know that our head is simply where the nerves come in and meet the blood, and where nerve and blood meet, spirit is created. And so the mental images in our brain, which there are literally mental images in our brain. Those aren't thoughts. Some are thoughts, if they're human thoughts, but if they're divine thoughts, they came from your heart. And they came up from your heart and through your throat, through the speech, and through your brain, through your thinking, getting all that garbage out of the way, and up above your head. And there's 1,000 names for this: the illusory realm, Tushita heaven. It's called by Steiner the etheric heart. And once you get into the etheric heart, you can do what these children do. Now, some of these children, if we go to see the Rage of the Day on Spotify, bigger than Joe Rogan, is the telepathy tapes. And these researchers for years have known this, and now they're putting it out into some tapes and some movies that will actually change your opinion if you don't believe in telepathy. This is absolute 100%, 1,000, 10,000% proof. And not only that, these children can see images through their parents' eyes, through other people's eyes. They can hear everyone's thoughts in the room. They know when you're a bad person. And if you believe in them, then they can demonstrate to you that you can hold up any book and they can tell you the content of the book, read it forward, read it backward, letter for letter. Okay, these children have never been taught to read or spell. Okay, so how does that happen? Now, this is the mystery that no one but Steiner will tell you. Elemental beings go into the motion of human beings. And so when handwriting was invented, and he specifically talks about handwriting, he says that there are elemental beings in there, very powerful and very subnatural and very subconscious beings. Now, some of these are elementals. Some of them are manifestations of higher beings who, again, have left their shadow in this realm through speech. And speech, of course, comes up from the earth. We must remember that. So that's why everyone has a dialect. You go to some place and the mountains made you talk this way, okay? I mean, really? Yes, every single person living there ends up talking that way, and not just because of influence of the people, because the geographic area does that.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner gives the example. He says, if you, like, let's say you're American and your wife's pregnant and you go to Japan and she ends up having the baby in Japan, he says that child will find it very easy to learn Japanese.
And look Japanese.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I used to do this as entertainment when I was fully clairvoyant. Someone would speak just a sentence and I'd tell them where they came from and what part of the state. And they'd go, how can you possibly know that? I said, because your accent, because I could hear it. I could replicate it in myself. I could see it in others. And man, it was like 90% accurate. And if it was wrong, it was only because they had moved.
Yeah.
And then I got to the point that I could say, let me guess, your first 8 years were in South Carolina. And then you went to Texas. And then and they'd go, how can you know that? I said, it's in your accent.
Yeah, I ran into a guy, a British gentleman in the grocery store, right? And he started talking. I said, oh, you're from the Midlands. And he looked at me. I knew he was from Middle England. You know, I could tell by his dialect. And so you have this whole idea that there's this continual relationship between the individual and the environment. And included in the environment is the folk soul. And the folk soul literally dwells within the realm of speech. And so you have this whole grouping that takes place. It's really quite fascinating when you get into the work that Rudolf Steiner does on all that. And Rudolf Steiner is very clear because the blood either is working towards the heart or towards the surface. See, and so when it works towards the surface, that's when you blush, like you want to like disappear, right? And it goes to the heart when you're in a kind of fight, flight, or fear, or what have you, and it's quite fascinating when you get into the whole landscape of what Rudolf Steiner says about the dynamic that's expressing there, because then you get into the liver and the kidneys, and that the liver, he talks about the liver is like an eye, and it's observing your blood, and it's making judgments by observing the blood. Whereas when you go to the kidneys, that's dwelling within the realm of your thinking potential. And so you have these kind of like internal organs that are sensate in a particular way pertaining to things that you're unconscious of. And so think of your whole organism as a multidimensional expression of all these kinds of activities going on that are being taken care of. I mean, when was the last time you told your heart to speed up or slow down? You know, but it gets to a point, and Rudolf Steiner talks about when you get, like when I studied yoga, I studied Kundalini yoga with the Sikhs, and you can learn to be able to control your breathing, but don't do it, because once you do it, you're responsible. Now you got to run that show. So it's something that you're unconscious of, that when you make it conscious, it gives you a responsibility. It's just like what Rudolf Steiner says about doing certain meditations. It's a commitment. Once you commit to doing it, like doing the foundation stone, you got to keep doing it. That's the idea, that you've opened that door. And so, in having the right mood of soul and the respectfulness when you chant Om and chase away all the demons, that's the critical point, because that's when you allow the archangels into your speech.
In ancient India, all music started with the veena, a one-stringed instrument that created the sacred space for the music to fill into, and that is called a carrier wave. And so when we're talking about filtering or gating, we first have to figure out the carrier wave. And that's what your heart is. And the organs, as John just described, are all playing the music of the spheres. And so a clairvoyant, and so basically we're now hearing from these autistic children that all of the nonverbal autistic children are clairvoyant. You can hear the harmony of the spheres. Now, sometimes they're harmonizing, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're dissonant, and sometimes to a clairvoyant, it'll knock you to the ground. You can hear the spin of the earth. Once you know what the carrier frequency is in your body, it's the beat of your heart and the rhythm of the breath. Steiner says your breath is a drum that beats into the nervous system that goes up your spinal column and sounds in the third ventricle of the brain. And then, of course, your heart is beating the frequency of the universe. And so what we're talking about here is, well, wait a second, then, can you hear someone else's heart? Yes. And once you can hear someone else's heart and they believe in you and you believe in them, or there's love, then you can have direct communication with them. And so, of course, the love of a mother for the child with these autistic children is a link they've been able to really take advantage of for research. But that's true with everyone. And so what we're talking about here are literally what, who was it? Aldous Huxley called it. I think he said something to the effect of, there are things known and there are things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. I would say that from a Steiner point of view, there's the physical world, there's the spiritual world, and the threshold is there. But once you clear yourself and you become a true organ of perception for sensible, supersensible perception, then you can cross that threshold and you begin to perceive there. And as we've taught in the Gospel of Sophia and so many other places, you learn the language of the spirit, and then you learn to commune with them. But in the book also is going to be a lot of the book we're talking about, Perception as Revelation of the Spirit. There's going to be a lot of different components. There's a component on why do you teach the eternal curriculum, or what is really the ether body, to children? Because it's the whole history of mankind. The memory exists in the etheric body. And where does the etheric body come to great expression? Just as John just pointed out, in the organs of the body. Rudolf Steiner says that memory is imprinted on the outside surface of the organs of the body because they are in direct contact with the planetary spheres and the sun. Your heart's in contact with the sun, and your organs are in contact with the other planets. So as you do this, you have to realize that, oh, if I'm going to perceive the inner and create a cosmology of good concepts, you could call them, not stupid human concepts, earthbound concepts, but real concepts, living concepts, which he calls moral imagination, then I can look out on the world and I can see spiritual beings. And this is what these children tell us. This is what any clairvoyant will tell you. This is what I told you in the many interviews we had with John on Interviews with an Exorcist. I described exactly the things these children are saying happens to someone who's clairvoyant. And so I highly recommend those tapes. But I want to go into the fact that in the book, to begin with, I always like to pose questions and then give some answers from the greatest minds. And so here's what the greatest minds think about the idea of perception. And I just love it. If you can't get it down to one sentence, yeah, I don't have too much time for you. And if you can't describe perception, then don't tell me you're a philosopher. Because if you don't know what perception is, you don't know what you can know. We don't know the limits of your cosmology, the limits of what you can know. Now, if you know the ethers, as Steiner says here, and I'm going to read this long passage from Steiner here in a minute, but if you don't know the ethers, then you can't get what he's saying. But if you do, then it becomes a revelation. That's why you become a Waldorf teacher, to watch the ethers in the child's ether body as it grows from 7 to 14. You watch that. It's like watching a garden. It's like watching the development of humankind all the way from the past to the present to the future. So the Talmud tells us we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. I mean, can it get any clearer than that? Really, if that was your entire philosophy, it's like do unto others as you'd have others do unto you. Really, is there any law you need to know beyond that? Well, if you were a philosopher, you might wonder if what things are. And when you realize that it's not what things are, it's what you are. And whatever you're looking on the world with, like two people live in the same house. It rains. One thinks that's hell because they're crippled and they can't go out that day. The next one is a gardener, thinks it's beautiful. It's heaven. So we get that all the time with people. Carl Jung said, it all depends on how we look at things and not how they are in themselves. Same thing we've been saying here today. It depends on what's inside of you going out to look. That is the key. Emerson says, people only see what they are prepared to see. Goethe said something similar to that. He says, you can't find what you don't know you're looking for. So if you don't know that you're looking for the ethers, then you're not going to understand what perception's telling you. And what perception is telling you is you are a being among beings in a heterogenetic linear time spectrum, which is a delusion. And if you understand that, then death means nothing. Death is just, as Steiner says, changing a raincoat when you go out into the rain, changing into a raincoat, just changing your coat. So William Shakespeare said, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Again, we're in heaven or hell. And he said it so beautifully. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to humanity as it is, infinite. Of course, William Blake, who else could say such a thing? And that's, A.E. and all these other people. I could go on and on and on in the book. There's a whole bunch of these. The deal is that if you get that, that is what if you've prepared and you've done your homework and you've studied and you tried to figure this out the best you could, whether it be through philosophy, psychology, science, the science of perception, which is really silly because they don't know there's inner perception. And that's one of the 12 senses that science doesn't recognize. You self-regulate, you perceive, John just told you, your liver perceives your blood, your kidney perceives the pressure in your blood, and your blood is sulfur, salt, salt, mercury, and sulfur manifesting through perception. And but it's very, very complicated. But the salts of the world what are the salts? The salts are the iron salts, the silica salts, all the salts in your blood. Without that, there'd be no life, there'd be no perception. And then mercury, well, mercury is solid or fluid. Well, so is the blood, and it can carry all this stuff. And we have yet to even slightly understand what mercury can do. And then when you go into sulfur, all metabolic processes are accompanied by phosphorus, adenosine triphosphorus. That's sulfur. So when I said to John, where is this quote? What must have happened is I read a whole lecture, and in my tiny brain, I mixed up these things. And then after I turned 70, I finally saw it for what it was. And we did these books because why? It's extraordinarily complicated. And it's as simple as those phrases right there. Now, I'm going to read you a long phrase. I don't like to do this, but I can tell you that in my, 40, 50 years of search in Steiner, I finally found the phrase that explained it all. But in it, it says, if you don't know the ethers, you can't understand anything. But it tells you the process here. Now, again,
the beauty is realizing when you find the quote you're looking for, that it's not what you remember.
Exactly. This is a whole different thing, but in the book, I have all the other things that built up to what all those things thought made me think, but then this is the simple way to get to it. So here I'm going to read it. What corresponds to perception are etheric processes. I'm going to stop probably throughout all of this. Okay. Perception is etheric process, inner and outer. We live with our perceiving in the ether. And people are going to say, what's the ether? Well, get the book and read it because it's so complicated that it's warmth ether, light ether, sound ether, life ether. Then there's Akashic ether. And then there's two other ethers, the tree of life ethers. So it's complicated. And so when he just puts, perceiving in the ether, inner etheric processes which occur in the etheric body come into contact with external etheric processes in sense perception. This is especially obvious for those sense perceptions which correspond with the so-called lower senses of smell, taste, touch, so on. An etheric process occurs by means of which we enter into relation with the external ether, just as we enter into relation with the air, with our physical body when we breathe. Without the understanding of the etheric world, an understanding of sense perception and sensation is impossible. When these representations, interactions with the ethers, have become, because that word is used in philosophy too, when these representations have become so alive that they are in fact imaginations, real imaginations, then they live directly in the etheric. They grasp the etheric. And then, if one has progressed far enough, one might say in an inward experimentation that one experiences within oneself as the ether, as a living reality, then one can know through experience what happens in sense perception, in sensation. Sensation as it arises through sense perception consists in the fact that the outer environment sends the etheric from the material surroundings into our sense organs so that that which is outside also becomes inward within the sphere of our senses. As a result of the fact that the external ether penetrates into our sense organs, this external ether is deadened. In perception, we kill any livingness we see. One of the big secrets. And as the outer deadened ether enters our sense organs, it is brought to life again through the fact that the inner ether from the etheric body works towards the deadened etheric coming from the outside. Herein we have the essential being of sense perception and sensation. Just as the death process and enlivening arise in the breathing process when we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, so also a process of exchange takes place between the dead ether and the enlivened ether in our sense experience. Sense perception can thus be recognized to be a fine process of exchange between the outer and the inner ether, to be the enlivening of the ether that is deadened in the sense organ by the forces of the inner etheric body. That which the senses kill for us out of the environment is inwardly made alive again through the etheric body. Same thing happens in nutrition. Same things happens in spiritual nutrition. This is the same exact. Steiner says all education is based upon breathing. This is the type of breathing he's talking about.
Well, that's fascinating because in the same lecture that I was making reference to earlier regarding perception, if you do Rudolf Steiner and then search Rudolf Steiner perception, a lecture come up. I don't recall the date on it right now, but you could find it's very easy on YouTube. But in there, he continues on and he says that the brain and nerve cells, that the only time that they're having life processes work into them is when you're asleep, and that your nervous system has a relationship to the white blood cells. And so the white blood cells are scamping all over the place, all during the day. And then when you go to sleep at night, well, they're lights out. So the nerve system lights up and the white blood cells lights out, and vice versa. They alternate. And of course, this is something that you're unconscious of, but there's all these discrete processes taking place, and the the question is, well, can you perceive that? When the answer is you do. It's just that you're unconscious of that. See, so that's the point we want to make, is that we're not trying to really bring you into realms where you don't have something, that you're really entering into realms that are already there. You're just becoming aware of what's actually going on. And what's fascinating, though, by utilizing the supersensible organs of perception, you unfold them, you organize them, your chakra petals begin to become geometrically clear rather than just these muddy ponds that are floating around. And when you get in it, then you can bring it to other levels. Like we go back to the liver, is the looking into the blood, and liver. Mind you, the liver is he says that it sees the blood. But if you go to the third eye, which is also Jupiter, right? That's your third eye. And what is that? That ties into the pineal gland that Rudolf Steiner describes, that was previously a sense organ that perceived warmth. And that it plays a very significant role as we move into the future. And so, of course, people are like drinking fluoridated water, and that turns it into a stub, basically, your pineal gland. And so you want to get rid of, you want to filter your water, and you want to get some iodine, and you can start a transferal where you'll get the fluoride out of your pineal gland. That'll be a good start, But as far as being able to be cognitive, shall we say, of all these discrete processes, if you're doing one thing and then you do something else, there's a trade-off. So if we look into what Rudolf Steiner says about the ancient world, about how we lived in a dreamlike clairvoyant state, and then as we move towards becoming wakeful, like in ancient Greece and then ancient Rome, as the intellect began to wake up, that was a trade-off. So we traded off the clairvoyance for this cleverness, shall we say. And so the archetypal story of that is Troy, the Battle of Troy, because you have the ancient method, the priesthood culture of Troy, being confronted by that intellectual cleverness of the Greeks, and that's the mythic representation of what we're talking about. And so you have this trading off. And so then obviously, if you can stop interfering with your perceptions, with your ego, then you're going to perceive more.
Yes, that reminds me that, Steiner said that the Greeks, when they looked out on the ocean, it wasn't blue. They said it was wine colored. So in the past,
The
perceptions were
wine
quite
red
different.
sea in
Yeah,
Homer.
the wine red sea. And you're going, what? That's not possible. Well, here's the reality. When you're a child, especially up to age 5 and even later, you see the after image. For instance, if you take a white piece of paper, put a big red dot in the middle and stare at it for 2 minutes, and then look at just the white side of the paper, you're going to see the after image, the opposite color, the complementary color, because that's what you actually see. When you look out on the world, what do you see? You think it's up, right side up. No, you see it in your nerves upside down. So a child, we have to paint their walls. If we want them to have the color of green, we paint them magenta, kind of a light red, and then it gives them health. Because for a child, color, sound, everything becomes nutrition. Sense perception is nutrition. Now, also, the child has a lot of life force, a lot of etheric force, especially from 7 to 14. So they bring it into their sense perception. And therefore, we have to be careful that every single thing in a child's room, every gesture that is made by the teacher, and particularly from their astral body where gesture has its home, needs to be perfect for the child. So the deal is, if you can see it, if you can open up those gates to go into higher levels of anything, any sense perception, you can become it. Now, an initiate, Steiner points this out, and many people point this out, that they start to hear 7 different levels of sound. What are those? Those are higher frequencies, and each one of them can take you into the realm of that planet, and it can give you new supersensory capacities because they're not yours. You're simply accepting them, you're adopting them, you're opening the gates to go there. And if you can repeat it in yourself, if it can live in yourself as your cosmology, then you can see more and more of it. So once we were taught how to perceive the child's etheric body from 7 to 14, we could do it. But now an initiate they're not happy people. In most cases, these children who are nonverbal, they look like they're the most suffering people on the face of the earth. Many of them can't walk. They have spastic gestures. They can't see very well. I had a brother who had many of these problems, and he lived a life of hell because people were scared of him. And it's universal that men generally are scared of these type of children. Well, if they knew that the child could read their mind, they'd be even more scared because they know that that man hated them and thought they were, decrepit and a deformed human being. Well, that's exactly what people think of a true clairvoyant. Because if they know you can read their mind and they're good, they love you. If you're bad, they hate you. And they'll do it whether they know it or not. And so we have all, as John said, we have all these perceptions coming in, but the question is, can we filter through it? And can we see it for what it is? And the ethers are what give us that, and what gives us etheric strength in our own body: health, spirituality, and 3 major things: wonder, reverence, and awe. And when you look at the ethers, and when you look at these children who are completely clairvoyant, there are also some clairsentient, some are telekinetics. So they're savants. They can speak in prime numbers. They can have conversations on a hill at night with their other friends because the rest of us aren't really up to their level. So you have to stop and ask the question, who really is advanced? Who really has the higher senses for perception? Who has developed their supersensible organs? And you may be shocked by who it is that has those capacities, not only yourself, but some of the people that you might consider quite unlikely.